Okay, guys, so today we are going to talk about the octopus. And our agenda today is pretty normal. We're going to go through our introduction. We're going to talk about the basics about octopuses. Then we'll talk about different species. We'll do our activities and go over resources. So as an introduction, you guys know me, I'm Megan, and I'm Aiden and Lizzie's mom. I'm still working at scientist.com, which is awesome. And I have science degrees in agricultural sciences, actually in poultry science, so science of like chickens and turkeys and things, and also in biotechnology. And you guys know that I love teaching and sharing cool facts. And we're doing these STEM classes for a couple of reasons. I wanted to change this up a little bit and explain it a little bit more. So the pandemic that we're all going through right now has really changed all of our lives. And I think, we're not going to school and we're not going out to shops and things, and we're kind of staying isolated. And so it's changed a lot of different parts of our lives and meant that we can't connect with each other very well. So part of the reason that we're doing this class is so that we can connect with each other and see friends and family and also learn new things together, because it's always fun to do that in a group. And we can kind of supplement your education. So because you're not in school right now, we're kind of giving it a little helpful boost and still having some fun. So you can also use this information later on in life. And it might seem a little bit silly to think that you need to know about octopuses or llamas or skeletons later in life, but actually these things are really good building blocks for things that you learn as you grow. So the more knowledge you have at the foundation of your house, the stronger your house will be. So we want to keep adding to that and helping you guys learn new things in an exciting way.
Megan,
Yes.
I know something that octopus has.
What's that?
I think it's 3 hearts.
You're exactly right. And we'll cover that in a little while because it's pretty cool. Okay, so first we're going to go over some basics about the octopus. And first of all, how do you say plural of octopus? Well, actually, people have been arguing about this for hundreds of years. And there was even a silly article in a newspaper in England in 1873 that I put a little clip from here, where people were arguing about it. There's 3 basic ways that you can say it. So the first one is octopuses, and that's the most common one actually, even though it sounds a little bit silly. And the reasoning behind this one is that we have adopted octopus into the English language. So we gave it an English plural, and we like to put ES at the end of words to make them plural in English. So we put ES at the end of octopus. The other school of thought is to say octopi. And people do this because octopus, they say, is a Latin origin word. So they give it a Latin plural for the I. And then you can also say octopodes. And people argue that actually before the word was Latin, it was Greek. And so we should give it a Greek plural. So you can actually say any of these 3, and people still argue about this, and all 3 of these are something that you can say. Some dictionaries argue for one or the other, and I spent a lot of time looking this up. But for this lesson, I'm going to say octopuses, just because that's the most commonly accepted version. Okay? So, what are octopuses? Well, they're in the kingdom of Animalia. You guys probably remember that Animalia includes all animals. They're in the phylum Mollusca, so like mollusks, in the class Cephalopoda. And you probably recognize the word cephalopoda as cephalopod, or the origin of cephalopod. And then down into their superorder, which is Octopotiformes, and then Octopoda as their order. And then down to their species, there's actually over 300 different species of octopuses. And they have wildly different characteristics, and I'll show you a few of these at the end. So if you remember when we did the one tree thing where we kind of zoomed in on the tree of life, I did this for you with the Octopotiformes. So you can see them right here. Here's an octopus. And their nearest living relatives are the nautiluses, which are these funny looking guys. And then down here, the squid. And as we go up the tree, we see it gets into cephalopods and then into other related species on different branches. But the closest ones for the octopus group are nautilus and squid. And as I mentioned before, there's a huge range of species of octopuses, which also means that they vary a lot in size. So remember, vary means that there's differences. So there's big differences in how big octopuses get. The smallest one that we know of right now is called Octopus wolfi. That's its scientific name. And it can weigh less than 1 gram, so less than like a paper clip, and measure about 2.5 centimeters or an inch. And there's a picture of one here on someone's finger, and that's an adult of that octopus, so very tiny. Meanwhile, the giant Pacific octopus, which is a fairly common species, gets huge. So their average size and weight is 15 kilograms, or about 33 pounds. And they have an arm span of their little octopus arms of about 14 feet, or 4.3 meters. So they could stretch across the room I'm in right now. But the largest one that has ever been found by scientists was way bigger than that. It was 272 kilos, which is about 600 pounds. And it had an arm span of almost 30 feet. So it's a massive octopus, which is really crazy that they can get that big. And there's a picture of a giant Pacific octopus with a diver down here on the right. So another interesting thing about octopuses is that they have a really unique anatomy. And anatomy is just basically the science or description of their bodies. So first, their eyes. Even though they're invertebrates, meaning they don't have a backbone, their eyes are really similar to vertebrate eyes. So they're similar to our eyes. And they have a retina in the back, which is a part of our eye that like kind of responds to light and where our rods and cones are. And they also have a really big brain. So they can see really well, but they can also process a lot of information. And the brain actually wraps around their esophagus or their throat inside their head, which is kind of crazy. And then the brain and the nerve cells actually stretch out into all the arms. So it's kind of like its whole body has the brain stretched out into it. They also have this thing called a siphon, which is a funny little tube that they can shoot water out of, and that helps them move through the water. And because they live in the water, they have gills. So just like fish, that's how they get oxygen out of the water. And then somebody mentioned this already, but they do have 3 hearts, and 2 of those hearts pump the blood across the gills to help oxygenate the blood or get oxygen into the blood. And the 3rd one pumps the blood around the rest of its body. So for humans, we have a heart with 4 chambers, and those chambers do different things. But the octopus doesn't have 1 heart with a bunch of chambers. It just has 3 separate hearts to do 3 separate jobs, which is pretty interesting. They can also, with all those brain cells that extend into their arm, they have a really good sense of touch and feel. And they can move all of their arms independently. So we can move our arms independently, which means they can do different things at the same time. So they don't have to always do the same thing, right? And they can move all 8 of theirs in different ways. And crazier still, if they lose one of those arms, they can actually regrow it, or if it's injured. Finally, the octopus mouth actually has a beak on it like a bird. So it's made of kind of similar stuff to like our fingernails, like keratin and things. And it's a beak like a bird, and it uses that to kind of smash up food. And then I'm sure you guys have also seen that the octopus has suckers on its arm, and it uses those to grab onto things because they don't have fingers. And those suckers can actually feel things, but they can also taste. So the octopus can use its arms to taste its food. And part of that is because the brain is extending parts of the central nervous system all down those arms. And then finally, the skin has really cool pigments on it. And those are in kind of their own little like pockets. and they can manipulate or change the shape and things of that pocket. And in doing that, they can make themselves look like different colors and also change the texture of their skin. So we'll show you that in more detail in a little bit. But even though the octopus is shaped kind of funny, they actually have something called bilateral symmetry. And that just means that its two eyes in its beak and its mouth its body is mirrored on either side. So if you split it down between the eyes, like if you draw an imaginary line between the eyes and through the beak, it's the same on either side. And that's because the arms are actually different on the right and the left side. They're not exactly the same all the way around, like with a starfish. Or you can see here, a coral polyp would be another example of this, where they have radial symmetry, where each thing is repeated as it goes around in the circle. But octopuses aren't like that. They're actually mirror images, just like humans or like insects. And animals also cannot be symmetric at all, like sponges and things like that. But I thought it was really interesting that octopuses are bilaterally symmetric, or their sides are mirror images of each other, because when you think of them having 8 arms, you would assume that all 8 arms are the same, but that's actually not the case. Their bodies also are really kind of soft and squishy. So I've never touched one, but most of the body is made of really soft tissue. And that basically allows the octopus to make itself longer or shorter or put itself into weird positions. And they can, because of this, they can squeeze through really, really tiny gaps. Sometimes even big species can pass through gaps of like an inch. And they can do this because they can manipulate all these tubes and things in their bodies of muscle. So their muscles kind of are wrapped around the tentacles, and then they have ones that go the whole length, and then their nervous cord is in the middle. So basically, they're kind of like tubes of muscle, and they can use those muscles to really manipulate or change the shape of their bodies. So much so that they can squeeze into little things like this jar, and they can squeeze through little tiny holes. Really, the only thing that limits them from squeezing through gaps is their beak, because remember, their beak is really hard when they use it to eat, so they can't really squeeze that down. And then also their suckers on their arms, like you can see here with this octopus in the jar, they can use that to move itself around inside of things or to move other things around it. So that also helps them kind of pull themselves into hiding places. And obviously octopuses in the wild aren't always hiding in jars or things like this in an aquarium, but they do hide in little rock crevices and safe places to hide from predators. And so they use their suckers to pull themselves in to do that.
Megan.
Yes.
I saw them in the aquarium.
That's very cool. Yeah, they have them in a lot of aquariums, but they've had some problems in the aquarium, and I'll tell you about that in a little bit. So they also have really good senses. So you remember I told you how their brain has a bunch of kind of extensions of their nervous system down into their arms like this. And they actually have the highest brain to body mass ratio of all invertebrates, which means the size of their brain, when you compare it to the size of their body, is really, really big. And this actually means that their nervous system that kind of controls their body and controls, you know, their thoughts and things is really advanced and really specialized. So octopuses are actually really, really smart, and they also can see. Most of them have color vision. Here's an octopus eye here. And they also have some variations or differences between the species of how much we think that they can see, but most of them have, you know, a pretty big brain, and they can solve puzzles. They can feel and taste things with their arms. And they also do something really cool where they have a special system inside them that helps them keep upright in the water. So you can imagine that would be a little bit strange, especially when you're squishing yourself through holes and things. But they have a lot of sensors all over their body to help them keep oriented the right way. They also do something cool. They have an ink sac, and the ink sac is in the mantle or the head of the octopus. And it's right down in here, kind of by one of the hearts and the gills. So this whole head part that we think of as the head is called the mantle. And they produce ink in this little sac right here. And then if something scares them or they need to get away from a predator, their body mixes that ink with mucus. And mucus is kind of like boogery stuff, right? Like it's kind of thicker and sticky-ish. And what they do is they mix the ink with that really quick, and then they shoot it out of their siphon. So you can see here in these pictures, there's a big gold brownish black cloud behind the octopus. And this one's upset with this diver, so it's pushing the ink out. And what that does is it usually scares or distracts predators that are trying to take a bite out of them, or it can help to make them almost kind of invisible so that they can get away really quick. And the main pigment in that ink, or the main thing that gives it color, is melanin, which you guys might know that word because we also have melanin in our skin that gives us pigment. And we talked about that during the sunburn and sunscreen class that we did. So I also want to tell you about octopus reproduction. This is super cool. So this is a female Pacific octopus, and these actually are all eggs. And the eggs are hanging kind of in these little branches almost, and they're strings. And if you look close up, they look like this. So there's little tiny baby octopuses in each egg. So now when you look back at this picture, you can imagine that's a lot of baby octopuses. So the octopus, this one specifically, the Pacific octopus, attaches these strings of the eggs over rocks in a crevice or like under an overhang, and they can lay 10,000 to 70,000 eggs for new baby octopuses. And then the female is going to guard and take care of those eggs. And that can be about 5 months until they hatch, or if the water is really cold, like somewhere north like Alaska, it can take 10 months for the eggs to hatch. And the female, the mom, aerates the eggs. So what she's doing is she's mixing up the water around them so that they're getting fresh oxygenated water. And then she also keeps them clean, because if she leaves the eggs, they won't get enough oxygen and they'll like grow algae and things and they won't hatch. And during this time, the female is actually really, really busy taking care of the eggs all the time. And she's so busy that she doesn't have time to even eat. So basically as soon as the eggs hatch and her job is done, the female octopus will die. And males actually, after they mate, also die. And because of this, octopuses don't really have that long of a lifespan. So some of them can live for just a couple months and some can live for up to like 5 years, but they don't live particularly long. And it's because they're putting all this energy into creating these eggs and then taking care of them. And that's a lot of work. And then once the eggs have hatched, they have a yolk sac, just like chicken eggs do, which is pretty cool. But eventually that's absorbed into their body and forms part of their gut or their digestive tract. And then once they are kind of ready, they'll burst out of these little eggs, and you can see some of the little guys here that are ready to go. So when they're not taking care of their babies and they are eating, they eat a whole bunch of different things. And almost all octopuses that we know of are predatory, meaning that they like chase down and feed on other species. And they actually can inject their prey with their saliva, so spit, that paralyzes them. And then they use those hard beaks that they have to kind of rip their food apart so that they can eat it, because they don't have teeth like we have to grind it down. So they use their beaks to rip it apart. And octopus, when they eat something that's got a hard shell, like a clam or a crab, they actually sometimes will spend several hours drilling a hole into that shell. So clams, if you think about it, are really well protected, right? Because they're like this, and the octopus can't get them open. So they're gonna drill a hole down through the shell, and then that lets them get to all the soft stuff that's inside that they want to eat. So they'll inject their saliva into the shell and paralyze the clam or whatever it is, and then they can pull the soft parts out and eat them, or even at that point, open the shell because the muscles are all relaxed. So a lot of the octopuses that live on the bottom of the ocean eat things like crustaceans, so crabs, like this guy here. You can see this octopus is wrapped around a crab. Or they'll eat worms or other like clams and things like that. But they'll also eat things that are already dead, so they'll scavenge. This one is a whale carcass that's left on the bottom of the ocean floor, and you can see there's a bunch of eels and things that are feeding on it, but here's an octopus having a little snack, and here's another one coming in too. So they'll feed on some other things as well. And bigger octopuses that live in not like quite so deep in the ocean will also eat things like shrimp and fish and even other cephalopods like squid. So they're kind of eating their cousins, which is a little bit odd, but they'll also eat, you know, crabs, and sometimes they'll even eat dogfish sharks. So here is a dogfish shark. Those can get up to like 4 feet long, and there's a giant Pacific octopus eating one right here. And you can see it's already taken a bite out of the side with its beak. So sometimes they will force like the food apart, but a lot of times they'll kind of drill into it, or with soft things they can just chomp right away with their beak. And again, they use their kind of paralyzing saliva to keep them from moving, and then they can use their suckers and things to manipulate or to move their food and eat it, which is pretty cool. Their movement is also really interesting. So most of the time when they're not in a hurry, they're kind of slow, crawling around and swimming a little bit with their head first. But if they need to go really fast, like they need to get away from something scary, or maybe they're chasing something, they use jet propulsion to go backwards. So it seems kind of silly, but this is kind of casual head first swimming. But see the siphon here that we talked about earlier, where they can shoot water out and they can shoot ink out, they'll use that to squirt really, really fast and then swim backwards. And that's actually the fastest way for them to move. They can also kind of walk along the ocean floor using their arms, and they can even get onto land doing that, which seems a little bit crazy, but sometimes they'll come up in tide pools and things. They'll come up onto land to grab crabs and other things that they want to eat. But there are also some species of octopus that are a little bit more awkward than the others. Like you can see this guy here, all of his legs are kind of attached with these fins. And so that one just kind of flaps the fins as it goes. So it really depends on the body, but for the most part, they use their suckers in their arms to kind of push and pull themselves across the ocean floor, kind of just slowly. And if they have to exercise a lot, it means that their heart rate goes up, and then they, their metabolism increases. Basically what it means is they need more energy. So we all need energy to do activity. And so the octopus kind of wants to avoid spending a lot of energy on things if it doesn't have to, because to replace that energy, it has to eat. Finally, I mentioned before that they're actually really, really smart. So here's a picture of an octopus that's getting ready to open a jar. So there have been lots of experiments done with octopuses, and they have a good problem-solving ability. They can go through mazes. They have really good memories. So they have both short and long-term memory. So they can remember things for a few minutes or up to like months and use that to solve problems later, which is pretty cool. One of the most interesting parts about them learning is that they don't learn anything from the adults. So as soon as they hatch out from those eggs, the mom dies, and then the little baby octopuses are just on their own floating around. So they don't have the opportunity to learn from the adults. So it's pretty interesting that they're able to learn things in the long term on their own. And they can even, in the laboratory, they can distinguish or tell the difference between different shapes and patterns. They can look at people and learn things. People have seen them doing things that are like play. And they also, and this is where I mentioned before that they've had some problems with the octopuses in aquariums, they can also break out of their aquariums and go into others to look for food, or even to turn off lights. So there's a famous story of an octopus where it was in an aquarium in the early 90s. So they didn't have like the internet yet really, or cameras set, like convenient cameras set up. And this octopus that they had in a room, they would come in every morning and the lights wouldn't be working and they couldn't figure out what was going on. So finally, the people that worked at this aquarium decided to sleep overnight there and to watch and see what happened. And it turned out that this octopus, who was known to be quite smart and to do quite a lot of silly things, he crawled out of his tank in the night and used his siphon, so the water squirty part, he used that to shoot water at a light that maybe was shining in his tank and bothering him, or maybe he just wanted to be silly. And the water hit the light and kind of shorted it out. It stopped the electrical from working, and then it went dark in the room and he was happy and he crawled right back into his aquarium. So after that, they figured out that they needed to point the light in a different direction or move it because this silly octopus was getting to it. I also have a friend that used to work at the Monterey Bay Aquarium. So if you guys know about that aquarium, it's kind of by where I live. It's on the Pacific Ocean. And they had a giant Pacific octopus. And it was in a really big room with a lot of other tanks. And some of the other tanks had clams and mollusks and things in it. And eventually they started noticing that a lot of the clams and mollusks were going missing. And this was while my friend was working there. So this is probably 2001, 2002. And apparently the other tanks were kind of far away from each other and obviously separated by concrete floor and things. And they ended up, they couldn't figure out what was happening and they thought maybe something was going on with the octopus. So they put a cover on the tank with a cinder block, so a big heavy brick thing. And stuff was still going missing from the other tanks. So they thought maybe it isn't the octopus, and they set up a big old camcorder in the corner. And what they found when they came in the morning is that the octopus would use its suckers to grab the top of the tank and it would scoot it over and it would climb out of the tank and across the floor and into these other tanks, and it would eat a bunch of the clams and mollusks and things that it wanted. And then when it was full, it would leave that tank and crawl back down and across the floor and into its own tank. But then when it came home to its tank, it actually picked up the glass again and moved it back on top so that it looked like it didn't leave. So they are very, very smart animals, and they can solve problems and they can be quite sneaky. So sometimes aquariums have issues where the octopuses are stealing other animals from the aquarium, which is pretty silly. They also can use camouflage while they're hunting, which I think is really, really neat. So let me make sure I'm sharing this correctly here quick. I'm going to share the sound, and I want to show you this cool little video.
Flat that see.
So you can see from that video that they're able to manipulate their skin to change not only the color, but the texture. So they can make themselves look like rocks or coral or other things when they need to hide. But then when they decide to go out hunting, they can change the way they look again to help them hunt. Very, very cool. Okay, so now I'm going to tell you about a few really neat octopus species that I thought you would be interested in. So this crazy looking one is called the southern keeled octopus. And if you look at it, it looks a lot like the sand, right? And these guys are found in shallow water, so it's not very deep. And it's around the coasts of southeastern Australia, and it actually hides in the sand really often. So you can see if it flattens out and changes its color, it can be really sneaky and hide in the sand. This guy is the Capricorn night octopus. And like its name, it actually is nocturnal. So it only comes out at night, which is pretty interesting. This is the blue-ringed octopus. Now these guys are small and they're really, really pretty, but as with a lot of other animals that have bright colors, they're actually dangerous. So the blue-ringed octopus is actually one of the most dangerous animals in the ocean. Its venom is 1,000 times more powerful than cyanide, which is a poison. And it has enough venom in it to kill 26 humans within minutes. So these guys are, you know, not all over the place, and you're unlikely to see one. But if you do see one, you should never handle it because they are pretty dangerous. even though they're just an octopus and they probably seem like it couldn't hurt you, these guys actually can.
Where do they live?
I think they live in Australia, actually.
Oh, good.
This guy, I thought his name was funny. It's called the Wonderpuss octopus. And it's actually named that because of the really pretty patterns that are on its arms. And it's kind of wonderful or wonderful to look at. This one is the algae octopus, and this one seems like it's not as bright or as cool, but what it can do is camouflage itself to look like a shell that's covered in green algae, so that when predators come by, they just think it's kind of a dirty old crusty shell, and they don't even look twice.
It's a small octopus, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. There's also this little guy called the coconut octopus, or sometimes the veined octopus. And he's a medium-sized octopus, and he is in the Pacific Ocean where coconuts are. And so what he does is look for tools to use, like coconut shells, that they will hide in for shelter. So they'll take coconut shells or seashells or things like that, and they'll take two halves and kind of put them together, and they'll use that to stay safe and it kind of as armor. So that's why they're called the coconut octopus, because they use coconuts as tools a lot. There's also this silly guy, the mimic octopus. And you can see he looks kind of like the Wonderpuss octopus that we saw before, but actually what he's doing is disguising himself. So this octopus is super sneaky and really good at camouflage. And using the changes in color and texture of its body, it also can change the way that it moves even to pretend to be other things. And from what scientists know of, it mimics or pretends to be at least 15 different species. So divers that have seen these have even said that they pretend to be sea anemones or jellyfish or crabs or shrimp or seahorses. So this octopus, I think, must be very smart and good at learning if it can learn to pretend to be all those other animals.
It looks like a spider.
Yeah, it does kind of look like a spider, doesn't it? There's also this silly guy, the California two-spot octopus. And this one has two blue eye spots on either side of its head. So you can see its true eye is here, but then it's got these spots that kind of look like eyes down here. And this one hides down in like the sandy bottom waters and in rocks and crevices. So then it changes its body to look like different plants and seaweeds that are growing down there. And this octopus is actually known as being one of the friendliest of the octopus group, because usually when divers see octopuses on the reef, they'll swim away, but this one apparently doesn't seem to mind too much if people are close by, which is quite interesting. And then I wanted to show you this guy because it's just very strange looking. This is called the blanket octopus, and it kind of looks like it's dragging a blanket behind it. So it looks like basically a wet blanket floating through the ocean, and it spends its entire life on the open sea, just kind of floating around. And I know, yes.
It doesn't look like an octopus.
Yeah, it barely even looks like an octopus. And Rhea, did you have a question?
Octopus eat stuff?
Yeah, they do eat lots of things like clams and crabs and shrimp, and sometimes even squid. But this guy, while it's drifting, I think is really especially interesting because we've talked before about how a lot of animals have something called sexual dimorphism. And that basically means there are differences between the boys and the girls that we can see with our eyes. So like the peacocks, the males have those big tail feathers and the females don't. So that's sexual dimorphism. Well, in this blanket octopus, the female and the male aren't just a little bit different in size. They're actually, the females are 10,000 times bigger than the males, 10,000 times. So you see this big octopus, and then it must be a female because then the male is probably like this big, which is pretty neat. And then finally, this is the Caribbean reef octopus. So I mentioned there's over 300 species, but I just wanted to pick a few to show you. And this one lives in the reefs and the grass beds throughout the like tropical waters in the Caribbean and the Bahamas and northern parts of South America. And they're really beautiful in color. They're kind of this bluish green, and they live about a year or a year and a half. But one of the cool things about them is that they hunt at nighttime. And so they use darkness as kind of a cloak around them so that other things can't see them, and then they go looking. But their skin is reflective. So when people dive at night in these waters and they shine a flashlight or a torch around, they can actually, their skin reflects that light and they almost seem like they glow.
There is orange, right? Or
Yep.
is it?
Yep, there's orange on there too.
Okay.
Okay, so now we're going to talk about activities. So for our small friends, if you're 0 to 6 years old, you can pick a picture to draw. You can do an octopus of any species you want. You can draw an octopus habitat, so like the ocean, or maybe it's hiding on the reef, or you can draw an octopus egg. School-aged friends, so 7 to 10, you guys can write a few sentences about the anatomy of the octopus. You can create a comic about octopuses feeding or eating, or you can draw an octopus species of your choice and label at least 5 of its parts of its anatomy. And then for our older friends, 11 to 14, you can write a paragraph about octopus intelligence, so how smart they are. You can create a comic about octopuses escaping from their predators, or you can draw an octopus species of your choice and then label at least 10 of the body parts. And I have a bunch of really good resources for you. Yes.
And did you finally get to see like my homework, my bedbugs homework?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
I'm sorry I didn't see that right away last week. So I was actually on vacation last week, and I was ignoring a lot of my messages, and then I realized I accidentally ignored your homework. So sorry about that. Okay, so we're gonna stop sharing.
Megan,